That's a very difficult question because, in fact, today I was there doing a keynote session on in an event that Economic Times had organized along with Coursera. So where there were participants from, vice chancellors from private universities. It was a very interesting discussion, and that's a very hard problem to solve. It's what can academia do? What kind of collaborations should happen between academia and industry to be able to accelerate this whole process of making what is taught in colleges relevant for industry, relevant for entrepreneurship is not very easy. I think in some ways the universities are also, despite the new education policy, operating with one hand tied behind their backs because while there is freedom to do a few things, there is also still some constraints, restrictions imposed by state governments, at the university level. So many things exist, and I also think what industry for far too long has been complaining about lack of talent and the fact that academia is not preparing talent sufficiently for industry. I think that's a very wrong attitude. I think industry has to participate far more actively and collaborate far more actively with academia and take ownership for creation of talent rather than simply sit back and expect academia to produce ready-made talent that industry needs. That's just not going to happen. I think if you ask me, what is the difference between entrepreneurship in India, in Bangalore versus what's happening in a place like Boston or Silicon Valley? I think Silicon Valley is Stanford, and at Boston it's MIT. So the amazing relationship between industry and academia in those ecosystems is working very well, where industry is taking ownership for working with academia for innovation, for the creating the right kind of course contents and all of that. Whereas in India, I think industry is taking an arm's length view, which is that academia, you guys have to get me the right kind of people, and if I feel like helping you, I will help you, but I won't take ownership. So I think that's a big gap that needs to be bridged, and there should be a lot of mutual respect between academia and industry. And I think in India, somehow that mutual respect is not very strong, as a result of which the kind of collaboration that should happen, where there's constant learning from both the parties, is not really happening to the extent it is required. I can try and give you some very superficial answers in terms of what academia could do, but I don't think the superficial answers are very helpful. I think if you ask me, since I'm sorry, this is a bit of a longish answer, but it's a very good question. So I thought, let me take some few minutes on this. So I think, for whatever reasons, in India, I've always said this in the past, which is China got old before it got rich. I think India got educated before it got skilled. And the reason, if you go back to history, thousands of years, the entire caste system, for example, if you take, the society was ordered in a manner that those who peddled some form of education were at the upper end of the caste, and those who were lubricating the wheels of the economy or trade, and those who were working with their hands were at the lowest end of the pyramid, and many of them were not even deeply respected. They were treated as outcasts. So in some ways, that belief system permeates, the Indian way of thinking even today. There was a friend of mine who was interested in education skills. He was there in a village near Jaipur in Rajasthan, and he was talking to the headman of the village, and he asked the headman of the village, like, why don't your sons take up corporate jobs in Jaipur? The headman called his three sons, and he asked my friend to talk to them. And my friend asked them, what have you studied? One of them said, I studied Hindi literature, bachelor's. And he asked him, why did you study Hindi literature? And the answer was very funny, which is that was the only subject which matched my bus timings from my village to Jaipur, and I could do only that subject. So in India, people, prefer to take degrees rather than skill themselves and work with their hands. And then the third son actually was working in the farm. And when the other two sons were asked by my friend, why don't you also work in the farm if you're not getting jobs in corporate? And their response was, how can we work in the farm? We are graduates. So in India, I think a lot of emphasis on this kind of education with zero employability, having no relevance to what industry needs, is there for a very long time. I think it took 75 years to make some fundamental changes to the education policy, Why should it need, for example, an ophthalmologist who studied for 7 years to be able to, prescribe glasses by doing elementary tests? You can have an optometrist who goes through a 1 year program and is allowed, for example, to conduct eye tests and prescribe glasses. So to make some of these changes in India seems so very difficult. I think India's answers are a lot in terms of providing flexibility so that educators can begin to do things which are relevant to industry without sticking to frameworks which are no longer relevant for us.